Okay, well, as people are coming into the room, let me introduce myself. I'm Suzanne Delgizzo, a professor of English and chair of the Center for Integrated Humanities at Chestnut Hill College. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our Humanities from the Hill webinar. Today's presentation is on facial recognition, people, power, and privacy in the surveillance machine. And it concerns the ethics of facial recognition technology. And we are featuring Dr. Nora Madison from CHC's Media and Communication Department, and Dr. Matthias Klang from the Communication and Media Studies Department at Fordham University. Let me take just a few minutes to orient you in this Zoom webinar. As attendees, you are in view and listen only mode. That means that you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. If you would like to interact with us, we have a couple of options for you. We have a Q&A feature. You can activate all of these features by scrolling your cursor across your Zoom screen. And when you do that, you'll see a couple of different icons. One is a Q&A icon. It has Q&A and 2 dialogue bubbles. And if you click on that, you can ask us questions at any time during the presentation. So feel free to keep it open and type in the questions as they occur to you. The other option is that you can chat with us. You can chat with each other as well. So I'll be watching the chat. Nora and Matthias will be busy presenting, so I'll let them know if anything important comes up there. But feel free to chat with each other as well. Also, we're using PowerPoints today. So sometimes your view might go wonky when they introduce the PowerPoint. If the slides look too small, run your cursor across the screen and it'll catch a little hand in between the PowerPoint slides and the presenters. So just pull one way or the other, depending on which one's too small or whichever one you want bigger. So with all of that out of the way, I get down to introductions. Dr. Nora Madison has home court advantage, so to speak. She's an assistant professor and chair of the newly rechristened Media and Communication Department here at the college. This past year, she was a resident Fulbright US scholar with the Digital Culture Program at the University of Bergen in Norway. Nora's research in Norway focused on the aesthetics of online digital protest culture. During her Fulbright, she worked with the Machine Vision Project, a European algorithmic images are affecting us as a society and as individuals. Dr. Matthias Klang is fascinated by the ways in which emerging media impacts all aspects of society. In particular, how our use of digital technology changes the ways in which our individual and civil rights, mainly speech, privacy, and identity, are both expanded and limited by technology. Nora and Matthias work frequently together, and their publications highlight the significance of digital technologies for everyday activism, explorations into digital activism and its discontents, a rebuttal of Slack on activism and protest. They have an upcoming book, Everyday Activism, Technologies of Resistance, with Rowan and Littlefield. So with all that out of the way, I'm gonna take myself into the dark and hand it over to Nora and Matthias until Q&A. All right.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you. Right. So we're going to be sharing this, hopefully in a logical manner. I'm going to begin. So let me just share the slides with you. There we go. That should be good. So yes, this is, for those of you who recognize good art, this is not it. This is a picture by the graffiti artist Banksy. Before we go on to the whole live facial recognition part, we want to do a bit of an intro as to how we got here. It's going to be a very, very short one because, yes, it's way too long and we can't go into all the details. But we need to start somewhere. And one of the main researchers in privacy and surveillance, David Lyon, talks about surveillance. And his definition, which we're very happy to use, is any collection and processing of personal data, whether identifiable or not, for the purposes of influencing or managing those whose data have been garnered. And this is the thing, because what we will see, especially towards the end of this presentation, there's a lot of data and a lot of ways to gather it and a lot of ways to do things with it. So where does this all begin? Well, it begins with the state's need to identify individuals. And of course, the earliest ways we did this was by naming people. We did it to ourselves, but also the state named us. And there's a long and fascinating history on surnames and how they became what they became. Again, not here. We're going to jump up to the 1800s, and that did not work. Why did not? There you go. And the eminent Alphonse Bertillon. Bertillon had this idea that we could identify different people in different manners, but mostly that we could do this scientifically by measuring them. He had a whole array of measurements, and in the end, his system turned out to be more like, what we think of as a classic mugshot, with a whole range of measurements on people. So you'd see the person, but you'd also see, you know, identifying marks, which you could imagine. You'd see eye color and so on and so forth. But you also see, you know, the height, the length of the hand, and the width of something, and all these things we use to identify people. An incredibly useful system, but also incredibly cumbersome system. So what it naturally was useful, but it was superseded quite quickly when we discovered when Francis Galton discovered that fingerprints were different between different people. He actually even made a calculation about the odds of fingerprints matching of two individuals being the same as 1 in 64 billion. He published his book Fingerprints in 1892, and it became so important so quickly that by 1901, New York police were already using fingerprints. And in 1904, Scotland Yard was coming to America to train what would become the FBI in the use of fingerprints. So we've done this. We've done the idea of fingerprinting and identifying, but that's kind of like the early stages. So I'm now going to just roll this over to Nora and see if we can do this seamlessly and easily. There you go, Nora.
All right. Did that work?
It did.
Okay, excellent. All right. Surveillance is, surveillance works with identification. Going back to Lyon's quote, right, that surveillance is the collection and processing of personal data for the purpose of influencing or managing those whose data has been garnered. So surveillance is always about a relationship of power, the power to collect this data and the power to use this data to manage or influence, right? And so a little history around what has led us to the moment we're in, live facial recognition, is really rooted in the development of CCTV. CCTV is different from broadcast television in that it is a closed circuit, and it can only, the data can only be shared between the camera and it's a closed circuit system, and you need to be in close proximity. I think that'll suffice. This is originally designed by Thurman in 1927. Early uses of this were also, for instance, in World War II to monitor the launch of rockets, right? But it's not until the 1970s where we developed VCR technology that allows us to record this data. So initially in CCTV, you always had to have someone at the monitor observing a live feed happening. It's not until we can begin to record this that we can, I'm sure people always walked away from the monitor, but if they walked away from the monitor and something happened, it was unobserved, right? And life kept barreling on. If once we could record it, we could come back to that recording, right? And we have now more archival data that we can access. And so it's really in the 1970s that CCTV becomes commercial, that it becomes something practical and popular. But there's this particular slowness to CCTV, right? There is this sort of administrative heaviness, this task of needing people to either watch the footage, or if it's just being recorded and something does happen, we have to come back to the footage and we have to view it and see what happened where. And so it really requires still a lot of human interaction. It doesn't function independently from us. Okay. Suzanne, why don't you release the first poll to our audience? And I will release the screen back to Matthias.
So the question you have in front of you, that we'd like to think about or to actually respond to, is how accurate do you think live facial recognition is? And you have the options on the screen in front of you. Oh, I think I could vote as well. That's a bit strange.
No, we can't.
Yes, we can. It's right in front of me. I'm voting. I can't. It just says so there. All right. If you have voted, we will go on with the show. So, as Nora was saying, there's in the system there is a problem or a sort of slowness in the system, because you have to either be watching it or watching the tape. And if you do see something that's happening there, you have to sort of alert someone to go and do something. And of course, if this is all happening in real time and we're talking about people, well, the thing that happened has moved on. So we need to actually have a lot more ability to identify. So you can imagine closed circuit television being used with fingerprints and other identification methods. Let's see, oh, we have a poll results here. 70% seems to be the most popular choice. But of course, all this sort of identification is really boring and laborious. So what we use then is we develop technologies to replace, oh, I should have been moving ahead here, to replace what we already have. So we start developing this idea of live facial recognition. And we're not going to talk about the technologies of live facial recognition, where what it is the machine sees. And I'm using air quotes for sees because machines can't actually see. It's a metaphor for gathering data. But all right, we'll just roll over on that one. The interesting thing about live facial recognition, the thing that is a game changer, is that you have all this data, all these people, all this movement, and the camera can literally look at everything all the time. It doesn't blink, it doesn't get tired. It can be badly designed, but that's a different question. It also does something which I find, or we find, this is why we're doing this kind of research, really fascinating. This is no longer about just seeing what's in front of the camera. It's about understanding something. So while passive camera surveillance is focused on the acts of the individual, and the facial recognition focuses on the identity of the individual, live facial recognition combines the entire history of the surveyed and brings it to the fore of the observer or to the machine. So let's try that. Let's just pick that apart a bit. We have the camera surveillance. It looks at people doing things in front of the camera. Fantastic. It took about 2 seconds for criminals to realize don't commit crime in front of the camera. Yeah. Facial recognition, which you have on your phone and in many other places, focuses on, are you the right identity? All right, cool, fantastic. Live facial recognition combines these things. It looks at who's doing something from the camera, and if we can identify that person, what the history of it. It can connect to your parking tickets, or it can connect to your Facebook account. So it's the entire history of you. You're walking around with an entire history, an entire database with you. This, of course, leads us to a bunch of ethical concerns, or what do you call a collection of ethical concerns? A plethora, I don't know, never mind. A bunch of ethical concerns, and we've narrowed it down to the 5 that we find most important, but we have many delightful arguments, whether they're 5 or 7 and what they mean. We're going to run through these rather quickly because time and stuff like that. The first one is connected to how the machines have been taught, how they've learned to recognize faces, and how they've learned to recognize different faces. And we call this one property over privacy. Actually, I won't give away that. That's a spoiler. You'll learn in about 2 seconds. So the facial recognition was systems were first taught in labs, in computer science labs, by showing computers or identifying parts of faces. Once the machine had learned this, they used machine learning to understand more about faces and different types of faces. Once this becomes useful, the machine needed more data, which reminds me of that bad movie from the 80s, but never mind that. So sometimes that data will be gathered from, for example, databases of pictures like the DMV databases. But for many labs, they went to the net and just scraped up pictures of people's faces. Where do you find a lot of people's faces? Well, you find them where people post selfies, so on social media. So many of these systems have gathered data from social media. Another really good source of these pictures is on photo sharing sites like Flickr. Let's say, sneaky or maybe well-informed researchers made sure that they collected photos that were licensed under Creative Commons licensing, which were so they're not violating the copyright holder, because using someone's copyright without their permission is not okay. But once they'd gathered all these photos, the question came, well, what about the faces? What about my face that you've used to teach the machine to do something? And that's when we realized your face actually has very, very little value in protection in that way. Copyright is protected because it's property. Your face, not so much, because that's privacy regulation. That's one way they scrape together. Another way, of course, is to get people to give you your face, or give the researcher your face. And if a researcher comes up to you and says, hi, can I take a picture of your face that I'm teaching this surveillance system? You're probably going to go, no. So what they did, well, they created different apps for that, different systems for that. This is an app that basically, and I think this one's still available, or versions of this still available, where you download the app, you'd put in your picture or a picture of someone, and you could, change the style, or you could see yourself as an older person, or if you're old, you can see yourself as a younger person. You didn't actually read the licensing, did you? Of course not. I'm a lawyer, and I'll say that right out. Nobody reads the licensing. You just download the app and start using it. The licensing said that they are going to use your picture for what they need to do. So what they did was, once again, they took our pictures and they trained the machines, and they also trained the machines to recognize people in different ways. So, what would it look like if you change your hairstyle and so forth. So that's, gone from creepy to creepier to this is really getting creepy. I can go even creepier. A Russian startup called FineFace was launched in 2016. The entire purpose of this app was that you could take a picture of someone out, and about, and that would match with their social media profile. It is amazingly creepy. So of course, there was an outcry, and the parent company, Entech Lab, decided that no, we probably shouldn't be doing this. And you think, look, social responsibility in tech is a thing. Actually, I'm sorry, it isn't. Entech Lab shuts down FineFace, but is now a world leader in facial recognition solutions. How did they become the world leader in facial recognition solutions, you ask? Well, by taking our pictures and using them to train the machine. All right, that's the first problem, and that was all about the idea of our property and our privacy. The next question was one of proportionality. So proportionality is basically the idea that the police should not use more force than necessary. The doctor should not use more medication than necessary. A military should not use more force than necessary. So a surveillance system is the same. It should use the amount of the harm it does should not or outweigh the good it's supposed to do. So what we see is with other surveillance systems, the harm it can do, a CCTV camera can see a crowd, but it can't identify a crowd, so fine. A facial recognition system can identify you, but can't actually connect it with your history. A live facial recognition, however, can. So the question already on proportionality is like, ooh, is this a good thing? The next thing, of course, is once we install the live facial recognition system, we need to make sure it works. These pictures here are taken from a live facial recognition test in the beginning of this year.
This year.
Sorry, this year, thank you. This year. It's in the greater metropolitan area of London, and this man is in Romford, a very rather dull suburb. He was walking from his home, maybe to the pub, because he's English. I don't actually know where he was walking. And he sees the signs that were put out that live facial recognition testing in progress. So it's January, it's cold, and he doesn't want his face to be seen because live facial recognition. So he does a normal thing. You see he's wearing a cap, he pulls that down. He's got a little collar, he pulls that up, and he zips up his collar, pulls down his hat, and tries to walk past. No biggie. The police think this is suspicious. They stop him. They say, "Who are you?" He is a perfectly free, totally law-abiding as far as the police are concerned, and he tells them to F off. Very British. The police then, of course, say, "Oh, no, you can't tell the police to F off. That is actually antisocial behavior, which is a crime." So they write him a ticket for £90, and they take his photo and add it to the database. So the proportionality we see here is the way in which the system is now more important than our right to privacy in the street. We cannot walk the streets because the system will demand. And if you try to hide from the system, well, the handmaidens of the system will come and say, no, you can't do that. The second level of proportionality is the way in which these systems no longer require a buy-in from society. This is a fantastic wanted poster for John Wilkes Booth and his accomplices for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Supposing you actually were on the side of the assassins and the police posted this in front of you, you would just say, yeah, I don't care. The buy-in from law enforcement is a collaboration with society. They have to be acting in a manner that society will agree, otherwise it cannot work. Well, the rewards help, I suppose. But the facial recognition system is basically saying, we don't need society to agree with us, we will do it anyway. All right, where am I now? Yes, so many different arguments. The third argument is one of cost benefit. These systems are incredibly expensive and should be used very sparingly. And the question then comes, how efficient are they? There's not many manufacturers of systems would like to tell you how bad they are. And the police who invest in these systems are really not keen on telling us either. But every now and then we see the results of the system.
Where's the results of our poll, by the way?
Oh, the results of our poll. I don't know. Thank you. We were at 70% was the
1 second.
highest.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Above 70% accurate was the most common response, and less than 50% accurate was only about 8%. Well, we are here to tell you that when data on the accuracy of facial recognition is ever leaked or shared with us, it seems to be grossly inaccurate. And those inaccuracies, by the way, also tend to follow around certain groups of people that we have trained or not trained our machines to be able to accurately identify, which we'll talk more about.
Yes, so the cost benefit here is also very strange. We're going into a policing system that's filled with conflict, and we're doing it at great cost and maybe not at great results. So that's a problem there already. Similar results have been identified from the tests in the UK, and despite having up to 90% false positives, in other words, misidentifications, they are still investing in the system because obviously they believe it will lead to better results. As Nora mentioned, these systems are biased, and there's a lot of really good research about the biases in algorithms, technologies, and software that's been done. So we're not going to talk too much about it, but we have to show you some of it that's really impressive, or really depressing, I guess is a better way of putting it. Yeah, sorry. This came out, so there's two different stories we'll tell. One is the way in which facial recognition actually works really badly on non-white faces. There are arguments that, well, you know, most of Silicon Valley's engineers are white faces, therefore non-white faces get sort of forgotten. Yes, this is one of the most egregious flaws that has happened when a man was actually arrested because of the facial recognition system. Look at the pictures at the bottom there. There is the one is the image taken by a camera which was fed to the facial recognition system, and the other was the person they arrested. It's terrifyingly bad. That is not even a match. But the system matched them, and because system says yes, they arrested the man. A more terrifying or problematic use has been recently discussed with the Rite Aid store. Rite Aid has been implementing Chinese designed facial recognition. By the way, Chinese designed facial recognition systems are among the best in the world, so you could at least say that they're buying the best. But they've been implementing facial recognition systems in their stores. And I go, okay, that's creepy, but more than that, they've been purposely using and implementing these systems in the bad areas, or as they say, the toughest or worst areas, which is a really, you know, loaded set of words. What is a bad neighborhood? Who are the bad people? And so on and so forth. So this is an investigation by Reuters, and they really nailed it. It was beautiful. They took the stores and marked the ones that had facial recognition systems implemented, and they overlapped them with actual affluence and household income. These are two pictures from Manhattan. And as you see here, I don't know if my cursor is able to show, but this is New York, there you go. Up here is the Bronx, where I work. Down here is the fancy part. And you see, there's more poverty up in the Bronx, and there are more stores with facial recognition. There's also higher percentage non-white people where the cameras are. There's an interesting thing down here. You see two white dots and a black dot, where the black dot marks a facial recognition system. That is in Chelsea, which is an affluent neighborhood, but that store is close to a public housing complex. So we are once again seeing surveillance being used against a certain group of people, which then of course will lead to the surveillance system catching that group of people more, and that will allow us to say, oh, look, those are bad, or people who do bad things.
But to add to that, they're implementing systems that are less likely to identify accurately non-white faces in non-white neighborhoods. So they're using live facial recognition in places where they anticipate even where the bias of expecting this behavior in these neighborhoods is obviously far greater than their expectations in an affluent neighborhood. So there's that level of bias, on top of which they're using software which is known to not be accurate for the very population that they're surveying.
Exactly. And this brings us into the whole discussion of false positives and false negatives. But remember, once a system will ping you as a suspect, the system will act, or, you know, and by the system I mean the people as well. So if the system says you are a known criminal, you have to prove that you are not. It doesn't work the other way around. So that's the really main problem. All right, the last final problematic area or ethical problem, which is huge, but we just have one slide for it, is basically the chilling effects of this. If we connect facial recognition with long distance lenses, which is definitely happening. China has now developed a lens that can accurately take clear photos of crowds of people, which means imagine a football game when they now ever return. You can take a picture of a whole crowd of people in a football game, and instead of like having little dots that you can't recognize, the system will be able to identify everyone. Where else is this important? Well, of course, in protests. And a protester is not a rioter, and a rioter is not a protester, but as we know, these are the labels which are politically applied. So how do we know if we can protest safely? And when I do teach my students how to protest safely, I have to say things like, wear masks, wear hats, don't bring your phone, so on and so forth, because the system will identify you. Another problem with the chilling effect, of course, is who needs to protest? Well, usually in a society, the affluent and well-to-do or the safe people don't feel need to protest. Protesters tend to be from social groups that need to protest, the weak. And since surveillance is about power, we're asking the weak to take higher risks in a situation where they will be misidentified. Problems everywhere. So that was the 5 problems. Now I'll toss this over to Nora and we will continue.
Okay, so we could go on for quite a long time on the chilling effects of live facial recognition on democracy. And I think that really we don't have enough data yet, but I think in the coming weeks, we're going to learn a lot more about how arrests have been made in Portland, for instance, and what types of processes they used for identifying protesters that they then picked up in completely other neighborhoods and areas away from the protest, maybe even 2-3 days after they were last protesting, right? And so I think we're going to have a lot more to say about these chilling effects. Previously we had talked quite a bit about the chilling effects in Hong Kong, and now we'll be talking quite extensively about the effects here in the States. Okay, so, but I think it's really important, we both think it's really important to really look at resistance to these systems, right?
Poll two.
Poll 2. Yes, thank you. Suzanne, if you want to release poll 2. So you can have a little bit of time to go ahead and answer this poll. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about resistance. Okay. I'm trying to hide the poll, but I'm not having any luck. There. Okay. I got it. All right. So resistance to live facial recognition has been around as long as resistance to recognition and to all sorts of camera surveillance has been around as long as we've been surveilling, right? Oh, now I can't seem to forward. There we go. There we go. And so there are lots of creative ways in which people have been trying to develop methods and techniques that could be shared widely. So possibly the most well-known and one that you might have even read about or come across yourself is Dazzle, which is a form of artistic application of face paint, makeup, face jewelry, and hairstyles that that are proven, that have been used with the software to show that it in fact blocks the right types of features that renders the software incapable of making a clear identification, right? So this is a great picture of members of the Dazzle Club in London. The Dazzle Club has been really active lately. If you follow them, which I do on Facebook, you'll see that there's been groups popping up all over I've been following mostly Europe, all over Europe, really going out into the streets and exercising or sort of even flaunting their They're anti-facial recognition designs. Another one of the many, many examples is face jewelry and sort of headpieces that are sort of very, very artistic in nature. So this one is Iwa Novak, and this piece is called Incognito. And here you have brass plates that rest on a piece of wire that fit over your ears like a pair of glasses. So you would put them on just like a pair of glasses, but the brass plates reflect light in a way that make it impossible for camera surveillance to properly identify you. This one is obviously a political and artistic piece, but can easily be replicated with objects at home. On the slightly more expensive side, but really interesting, is also privacy eyewear. And the privacy eyewear are not just sunglasses that, for instance, might block your eyes from iris scanning, because most retinal and iris scanning can actually go right through lenses, including darkened lenses, right? But actually what it does is it emits, my words, it emits an infrared radiation that blocks the camera from being able to properly capture your image. Okay, and then this is a very, very recent one, hyperface. Hyperface is actually pretty new to the scene. First really developed in 2013 with some updated designs in 2017, but now in 2020, interestingly, as we all are, I think, unforeseen, but as we're all adopting masks as a part of our daily wear, hyperface is not actually about blocking the camera from being able to properly identify you, but it's actually about confusing the camera with background and foreground, making the camera not able to distinguish between background and foreground, so it can't tell which part is your face because of the way that the images work. And so,
can I interrupt? Can you go back to?
Yeah.
So the nice thing about hyperface, if you look at this piece of cloth here with the pictures, the camera is identifying faces, and that's what's happening here. Yes. So instead of seeing you, it's trying to identify where you are. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And so here's an example, for instance, with a neck gaiter, right? Something that's becoming very, very commonplace now, with this type of anti-facial recognition in a really commonplace way. So, you know, it requires less of you being bold enough to go out into public with, you know, wild blue makeup across your face, right? You can just pull up your hyperface neck gaiter. Along those same lines is actually You Are Me, plays on the same exact idea. This is Leonardo Salvaggio. And what he did is he made a mask of his face that he allows to be widely available to other people, so that you come up on the camera as a legible face, an identifiable face, but you have all become Leonardo Salvaggio. And so your anonymity is actually not in not being recognized, but being recognized as someone else who is now also in 100 different places. And You Are Me. So that's a very clever way, and the hyperface is sort of doing that in a different, but using the same concept. This is just an absolutely wonderful, low-tech, you have to grow your hair long enough. Neither Matthias nor I can pull this one off, but if you've got the hair for it, this is your everyday mask that you can wear out of the house. What is the issue? The issue is that as we continue to develop products and techniques for avoiding facial recognition, countries, counties, local governments, and state and national governments are aware of these subverting tactics, and they're aware that this undermines the very purpose of them using LFR, right? And so we're seeing an increased number of bans against certain types of veils, certain types of masks. Hong Kong, especially a few months ago, pre-COVID, had a complete ban on masks for all of their citizens, whether or not they were involved in protests or not. It was a ban, right? And so, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to say that this is an interesting, I mean, in part, once again, we're seeing the system requires active buy-in from us. Well, we're not buying into the system, but they will change the rules to make sure we can't hide our faces. There, in Europe especially, we see two different threads where this comes from. One of the threads is from mass protesters and violence, where we felt like, okay, so that has to be curtailed. Another interesting thread is the ban on religious garments, the hijab and the burqa and the niqab, because they are seen. So these bans on certain types of facial coverings are also can be connected with right-wing views and anti-Muslim sentiment. So we see a whole bunch of these different things enacted, and some of them are very brief, like you cannot wear a mask and commit crimes, while others are totally sweeping. You cannot hide your face if you are in public. So there are similar bans in Hong Kong, as Nora said, but Canada has bans, California has bans, Florida has bans. So they're all over the place. And again, it's not that if we all wore bans, they can't do anything. It's also the way in which it allows the police to stop us if we're wearing a mask. Now, as we have learned, we're supposed to wear masks today. I think, oh, problem solved. We're all wearing masks. It's not to be evil. It's to prevent COVID. Now, of course, what are we doing? We're providing the system with thousands and thousands and thousands of images of people with masks. The machine is learning what we look like with masks. Sorry.
Exactly. That is exactly right. That is where I was going. So now these machines are being fed a whole new mass amount of data about what our faces look like in these masks. So a regular mask, the ones that you and I are more likely to wear in our day-to-day lives during COVID, are not necessarily, or at least for long, won't really be subverting LFR. They are currently, the LFR systems are struggling with people in masks, but they're quickly learning. All this data is being fed in. Things like hyperface, the design on the mask is meant still to be effective, right? Because the camera can't effectively figure out what to zone in on, or what are your features, or what are the features of the microfaces all around you. But your everyday masks, those soon will not really disrupt LFR. And the truth of the matter is that it's not only facial anyway. So as we move forward, a lot of our work on LFR has been to try to bring to the public more sort of a conversation where we're all engaging in these ethical questions. These are our ethical questions, right? These are the questions that we're currently writing about, we're currently publishing about, those 5 that we've introduced. Those are the ones that we're sort of wrestling with right now. What are the ethical implications on the chilling effects of democracy? What are the ethical implications on the effect on social groups, right? But it's not only facial. So let's see the result of your poll. All right, which of these are not actual? Okay, so half of you have said they're all systems of recognition, and you are right. Well, there are a myriad number of software technologies being developed right now that are going to be able to distinguish us, and some already exist, that can distinguish us based on tattoos, based on gait, which is the way you walk. It's apparently very unique to you, your gait. Keystrokes. And Matthias claims that he can always recognize when I'm the one typing in a large room of other people. I have a very distinct keystroke, right? Even more unexpected might be that there is software technology for identifying you based on odor, based on your heartbeat, and possibly maybe the most unexpected is that all of our sphincters are very unique to us. And there is now a system in place for patients who have to opt in. So you have to be willing to use this system, which is looking at a whole bunch of health factors around your entire GI tract. But among them, you are identified not by a special code or number or medical record, but in fact by a very specific image of your body. So these are all ways in which recognition is continuing to advance. So in conclusion, we're sharing this with you. If you would like to read a little bit more about some of our arguments about surveillance and its effects on activism, these are some of our more current pieces that have informed our talk today. But mostly we just really want this to be a conversation that we're having as a country, as a world, as a sort of global village that is now dealing with issues of machines being able to not only recognize us, but grab that identity and link it to all the other data among a variety of databases that collect information on us. Our phones, our GPS locations, our friends, what types of politics we retweet on Twitter. Like, you really need to think about the system and how it comes back to paint a particular picture of who we are in the moment that we're captured, you know, our image is captured. So I think that's everything.
Yeah, I just want to add, Nora was just tangentially talk about it. It's the system is not one. So they were talking about overlapping systems of surveillance that are used simultaneously. I think we got there. All right, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a great quote to sort of end with, and I always like it, is Edward Snowden saying that if you don't care about the right of privacy because you have nothing to hide, is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say, right? So we'll end there.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you guys so much. So I just want to remind everybody who is attending that you can both chat to us if you like that, or you can ask us questions in the Q&A. So far, we don't seem to have any questions. I think everybody was just engrossed in the new technologies. and then I imagine we lost some people as they peeled off to order some of the technologies. But one of the things that I was struck by was this way in which we are complicit in getting the images in the bank, so to speak. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the more ingenious or strange ways that you think we're being tricked into giving our face over to the image banks that are used to search?
Well, I think, I mean, obviously, we were very concerned, well, people were very concerned when iPhones started using fingerprints to open up your phones and in the face. They have been reasonably safe, but they're obviously training their own systems with these things. The more ingenious ones are the ones like the Ring doorbell that has a camera in it, which of course is, where is that data going? And the thing that we have to pay attention to is that it's not just what is Facebook doing with my data, which of course is another place that has a huge amount of pictures, but it's the way in which they are connected to other users, and there's a whole ecosystem, a sub-economics of sharing this data among users. So you have things like Amazon has a whole, their whole facial recognition system, but that is also connected to what Amazon owns. So you can never look at the companies on their own. You have to see them where they are in this huge ecosystem of other companies. But I think the creepiest ones, or the easiest ones, are obviously the apps that maybe as an adult you'll use once or twice, but as a teenager you're like fascinated by. You'll take pictures of everyone, and you'll you know,
age. The new one's the baby one that was all over Instagram the other day. I'm going to add to that though, Matthias. In a lot of ways, we have a mistrust of a lot of the companies that run digital applications. So we already sort of have these, you know, like, what's Facebook really up to? What is this app actually doing? Or at least a lot of people have some healthy skepticism there. What people don't often think about is the way in which they're not really truly protecting their own internet, right? And so people really, really use digital camera monitors on their babies and don't always use very secure internet connections. And there are entire websites dedicated to watching other people's babies sleep, right? I mean, and I'm not kidding, right? But then also that's a complete field to be mined. You can be mining these images as these babies' faces change over a 2, 3 year, 4 year period that the parents are still using those monitors. That's just data that can be mined right off the internet. No one tricked you into it, right?
And so much of it masquerades as like your security and safety too, right? So and now I'm feeling guilty because I taught an aging class a few years ago and told everybody about the app. So I didn't get paid though. Anyway, we have a couple of questions now, and there's one. Any comment on open source intelligence techniques? Thinking of trace labs.
No, I haven't thought. I mean, the advantage with open source is, of course, the way in which the system is developed. And we can see the transparency in the algorithm, which is useful. I haven't really thought deeply about whether that is an ethical issue on its own, because the algorithm is all about identifying it anyway. I mean, you could have this discussion about whether it's good, well-designed or not, which open source enables us to have. But from the perspective of facial recognition, it's not really about the algorithm, it's more about the database. But of course, you have to be able to use the database. So I'm going to go with like, don't really know on that one.
I think a lot of what we've been looking at right now has really been about state use, about police, about really, really trying to get people to think more about those relationships in terms of power and data. And for instance, really get them to question. A lot of people end up feeling somewhat safe, right? But I'm not doing anything wrong. That's why I like this note and comment, right? But I'm not doing anything wrong. So if they have my images, it's so bad. But then that is all in the eyes of the beholder. And I really do mean that, right? So if you are, and I'll just use this example, right? If you are walking near a Portland, federal courthouse, and you aren't necessarily engaging in arson, but they pull your image because they don't know yet who you are or aren't, and all of a sudden they pull up me, and I have, let's just say, left-leaning ideas about the world, right? Do I become a person of interest simply because they now have my image and have a little information about me, right? And so we're really trying to get people to think deeply about these power plays. So we haven't looked so much into open source because it's a different kind of relationship usually.
I want to tag something else on that, which is the Nora uses the word they, and so do I. The question is also who owns the data. One of the best examples of this is not in facial recognition, but in license plate readers. The largest database of license plate readers in America is actually held by repo companies, because repo companies have a lot of cars driving up and down, taking pictures of license plates. When the police want to know where your car is, where you are, they would, if they were going to have this system on their own, they would need to have a court order. But if they subscribe to the service provided by the repo company, they don't have to have that. It's just a service they have. The same thing applies then to the facial recognition databases. It's whose database is it? On one level, I would rather the state built their own database, because then we could say, well, the state has to have these safeguards. Now the databases belong to companies like Clearview, and Clearview will just rent out their system, and that doesn't have the safeguards to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing that becomes really important is that the United States is really lagging behind talking effectively and making real measures towards privacy, right? Privacy issues and data. So,
Well, that's the next question, actually. What what kind of right do you understand privacy to be? This person goes on to say there are natural rights, liberty rights, negative rights, positive rights. So that, you know, we've got another 5 minutes.
Well, I'm going to go, okay, so that's a philosopher. I'm a lawyer. I mean, from the perspective of the right to anonymity, I would argue some sort of natural right that doesn't actually exist in the law. But from the perspective of an actionable right that exists, there are very few legislations in America that work. California is working with some. There are some different discussions about it. You go to Europe, the GDPR, the Data Protection Directive over there, my old place, is much more concerned about privacy. The problem again is that while that works, it cannot work on the individual level because the question is, where is Google? You know, where is Google's database? Again, then you go, where's Google? Where's Clearview? Where's all these companies? They're all over the place. And the databases get bought up by other companies.
Yeah. And American law has historically been interested in property. And if it can be labeled as property, then all of a sudden many laws can kick in. But and that's one of the arguments that we're sort of making is that your faces are being treated as property, but the rights to them are actually either in the photographer themselves, right? That's the copyright. The copyright isn't actually, I don't have the copyright to my face. The person who takes my picture has the copyright to that image, right? So it gets very, very complicated, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be pushing to have these conversations. This is a conversation that Europe has been having for several years, and they have the data rights protection. And we keep punting the conversation, and it definitely benefits corporate interests enormously.
The question who owns your face or who owns a photograph of your likeness has been going on since there are court cases in New York from 1905. So we've been arguing this forever. You have some protection if the photo is going to be used in advertising, but otherwise there are some amazing, wonderful cases where people have used images of other people for artistic purposes, and there's no protection. There's a New York photographer called Svensson. He literally created a photo exhibition called Neighbors by using a telephoto lens and taking pictures of the building across the road. And they were pictures of people in their own apartments on the 27th floor or whatever. And he had this huge exhibition. And of course, people sued, and it was First Amendment rights, artistic expression.
Oh, we can't get students to use webcams during class. Okay. I think you spoke to this last question, but I think it's nice to acknowledge it. But, you know, why do you think people are so complicit in giving up their privacy? Convenience, safety?
I mean,
Normalcy.
The answer is convenience. The complex answer is power. If you don't feel threatened, then there's no reason not to do it. It's fun, it's enjoyable. Facebook is lovely. And of course, you know, it serves a practical social purpose. It's when rights are necessary for those who are endangered. The right to vote, hell, I've had it longer than you guys. I'm a man. So we need to enact rights for the groups that need them. So if we don't feel threatened by them, that's still not a good excuse. But yes, I think convenience is the reason we do a lot of things.
And in this instance, I would also like to add that the technology is shiny, right? It's shiny, it's playful. Who isn't having fun with it, right? We're all like, oh, ha, 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 this is what I look like at 82, right? Or any number of funny things that we do, and then we share them in what we perceive to be this intimate network. I mean, even if it's out on Twitter, we think like my followers are looking at it, even though we know it's like completely open, right? But we have this sense of community around social media. That's how it works, right? Is this perceived sense of community around it. And so I think there's also, or I should say, in building in agreement with Matthias's response, I would also say it's fun. And so we're less likely to take all of we're less likely to sit and think about the darker aspects.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, those are great answers. Wonderful presentation. It's 5 o'clock, so we're going to try to respect our hour. But I want to thank you both for being with us today and giving us so much to think about. I imagine, at least for me, it was a real education in protest culture. So I got to go do some searches on the internet now to figure out how much it costs to block my face. But in any event, thank you so much. It was wonderful. And thanks to the audience for your time and your attention. And we hope to see you. We don't have anything planned yet for the fall, but we hope to keep these webinars going, especially if we find ourselves again in lockdown, so that we have a way of connecting. So look for future announcements, and thanks to everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.